How do I know if it's me or God speaking? How many times have you asked that question? And today I'm going to give you the final answer. The answer you've been waiting for. Going to make it really simple. The answer is yes. No. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But I am going to try and address this question directly because I think everyone has this question, don't they? How do I know if it's me or God? Like I've said, the Spirit is inside us, and so often the way he speaks to us feels like us. It feels like there's an element of it feeling like our thoughts and our thinking. And so people have asked this question in lots of different ways, but it's important, of course, first to understand what we're talking about. We're talking about hearing God's voice, and we're talking about something that is not a science. You can, it's like any relationship. If you try and put an exact science on any relationship, whether it's your spouse or whether it's a friendship or a family member, if you try to put science onto a relationship, it usually doesn't work well. There's not 5, like if I was to stand up and say, 5 easy steps to make sure your marriage thrives forever, then I would hope that you would just go, that's nonsense. Particularly the ones that have been married for a while, they'd be like, it doesn't work like that. And so it's important we know that when we're talking about hearing God's voice, it's an art, not a science. It's more like, it's a relational thing. So to try and put a really kind of methodological, scientific perspective onto a relationship, it just doesn't fit. There's no simple 3-step process. So how do you hear God's voice? The question remains is, well, how do you develop in any relationship? You learn to recognize what God sounds like. You learn to recognize what he sounds like. It sounds really simple. And you're like, well, how do you do that? Well, you read the Bible. You're in his word. You understand what he's spoken to us. And then you take risks when you think he's spoken. When you think he's spoken, you take a risk. And what you find is that develops a history. You then can point back and go, well, when he said this and I did that, it was God. I could tell looking backward. And then you start to pay attention to the little things, the little nudges, the whispers, and you just go with them. And in the process of going with them, you start to learn what his voice is like. You start to go, that feels like the last time when he spoke to me and I did this. And it's like any relationship. The history is the thing that produces the intimacy. You can't shortcut a relationship to being really intimate. It takes time. It takes years. It takes time with the person, time in their presence. And you have to act on the words, and you'll find that as you act on them, that's when he meets you. It takes time. It's not an overnight thing. And of course, the biggest thing often behind this question, maybe not for you, but perhaps for me, when we ask, how do I know if it's me or God speaking, is there's actually an anxiety or a fear within us about getting it wrong. I think there's something underlying this question that we all face into, which is the anxiety or the fear that it was just us. It was just the bad cheese we had last night that gave us the dream, rather than God's Spirit. We have a fear around that, and I think that is the thing that I would want to address next. This anxiety about whether if it's wrong. And again, this begins with understanding the relational context. What do we think about God when we get things wrong? How do we view him when we've made mistakes? Do we really see him as that loving Father who, is just delighted that we're taking steps, not that we fall over? Or do we view him as the harsh judge who's waiting to catch us out on the slightest thing that we do? That he's holding us to some moral standard that we cannot handle. How do we view God? How does he feel about your failures? Because if we get stuck in the anxiety or the fear piece, it's probably because we need to come back to knowing what he's really like. And this happens to us all. We lose sight of what God is like, but he is your perfect Father. He is your perfect Father. And he, it's like, the kids learning to ride their bikes. They fall over, they make mistakes, like had such a bad back for a while, just trying to run along behind them to hold the seat, and you're like, you're fine, and they're wobbling all over and they're doing all of that. I wasn't bringing judgment to that and going, well, what an absolute idiot you are. You can't believe you can't ride your bike instantly. Like, it's like we need to have that perspective when we're learning in things of God, that he is for us, that he is the perfect Father. And what a good day to talk about that. He is the perfect Father. He's not looking down on you. He's not disappointed in you. So if you want to be freed up from the anxiety behind this question, it's got to be in his love. His words to you are life and hope. And he longs for you to step out in things and not to have the fear. It's like Peter. We love the story of Peter in the New Testament. He just constantly tries stuff, doesn't he? Now, he's definitely an extroverted character. He's definitely that kind of person who, I'll do that, hand up first to volunteer. But there's something in there for all of us to learn, that perspective of, if Jesus says it, I'll do it. And Peter stepping out of the boat onto the water. It's that picture. It's like, well, there was nothing that said that he would be able to walk on water. He'd never seen the evidence of this. And yet he followed the voice of God. And we often think it's going to be absolutely catastrophic if we hear from God wrong. But if we follow some of the guidance that we've been giving you guys, it's not catastrophic at all. We're putting safety nets in. We're putting all of that in. The biggest safety net is his love, but we've got this guidance as well. It's strengthening, it's encouraging, it's comforting. There's nothing holding you back from stepping out. So be brave. The kind of brave that knows that you are good enough, that you are enough, that you are loved, and that you can call God your dad. Spend time with him, and you will know what he is like.